So let's say you want to add some weight to your golf clubs, but maybe you don't want to use lead tape. You don't want to deal with it. You don't want to see it all over your golf clubs. Well, second option, you could use little tip weights, right? If you've seen the channel before, I use these all the time. You put them in the shaft. When you're putting it together, epoxy the head on, and now you've got extra weight and you don't see it. It's a great option. However, it's really only a great option if the club hasn't been assembled yet. If it's already put together, well, this is a lot of extra work to take the club apart, put one of these in, re-epoxy it. So today in this video, I'm going to give you a third option, sort of a best of both worlds. I'm going to show you what that is right now. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're having a wonderful day. So what is this third option if you don't want to use lead tape and you can't or don't want to use a tip weight? Well, the third option is called tungsten powder. So what is tungsten powder? Well, this is what tungsten powder ends up looking like. At least this is what mine came in. Comes in a little jar. You open it up and it's full of gray tungsten powder. Also comes with this cute little spoon. We'll get back to exactly why that's important, but this is all it is. Okay, so what are you going to need to do this? Well, first off, obviously, you're going to need your golf club or your golf clubs. The other part of this is you're going to need the golf clubs to not have the grip on, because we're going to be adding this weight through the shaft. So your clubs minus the grips, minus the tape on the ends. You're also going to need your tungsten powder and some little corks, some little plugs that are the right diameter for the shaft you're going to be using. So these are for steel shafts. They also make these corks for graphite shafts, and those would obviously be much more narrow because the inside diameter of a graphite shaft is a much smaller size. But for us, for this, we're going to use these. I also have just a random piece of scratch paper and my ramrod. I did a video, and I will leave a link in the description down below about how I put this together, but you do need, this is necessary, you will need some sort of ramrod when you're using this method. All right, now I'm just going to put on this split grip that I use for swing weighting purposes sometimes, and we're just going to get a starting swing weight of this golf club that I have. Okay, the starting swing weight on this club is D5. Now, obviously, that's already pretty darn heavy. You probably wouldn't be adding a whole lot of weight to a D5 golf club, but strictly for example, we're going to say this D5 club, we actually want it at D7. So that's the number we're going to try and hit. All right, a few things I forgot to mention. First off, one more thing you're going to need, we are going to be needing some epoxy. I'm going to be using just quick set 5-minute epoxy. That is purely going to be based on how many clubs you need to do. If you need to do a whole set of clubs, I would not use 5-minute epoxy. I would use something with a longer set time. For this, with one club, tour van, 5-minute epoxy, perfect. Second, in case you're wondering, I got this tungsten powder from GolfWorks. You can get it from other golf club making websites as well, but that's where I got this one from. As a side note, this is not cheap. This is pretty expensive. I think I paid like $25, $35, actually may have been close to $40 for this little container of tungsten powder. You can also find lead powder. They also sell lead powder, and it is significantly cheaper. Now, that being said, and this is just my opinion based on my limited knowledge of science, but I'm pretty sure that that lead powder is a pretty horrible idea. It seems like not a great idea to bring a toxic metal in a easily spreadable powdered form into your life if you don't have to. So yes, the lead powder is cheaper, but I think it's also way more dangerous to use. So I would say go ahead, spend the extra money, get the tungsten powder, and not have to worry about those sorts of things. So lead powder, bad. Tungsten powder, good. Okay, last thing I want to mention real quick is the proportions of weight you add to swing weight points, right? The general rule, 2 grams equals 1 swing weight point. So if you want to add 2 swing weight points total to this golf club, we are going to want to add 4 grams of weight. That's the general rule. If you were doing lead tape, that is usually the case. And if you were using a little tip weight, that would again be the case. With the tungsten powder, in most cases, you are going to need to add a little bit more weight than the standard 2-to-1 ratio, because whereas lead tape and the tip weights sit way down here at the bottom, the tungsten powder is going to sit a little bit higher up in the shaft. And depending on how the club was put together, depending on if there's maybe already a tip weight in there, that tungsten powder is going to sit a little bit higher up in the shaft. What that means is it's going to have less of an influence on the balance point, and it's going to impact the swing weight a little bit less. So in order to get that 2 swing weight point change, if you are really wanting that exact number, you're probably going to have to add a little bit more, say, I don't know, 10% more of tungsten powder weight in order to get that swing weight. Okay, let's get started. First off, we're going to set our scale in grams. I do this always with just a piece of paper, and I just sort of fold it and make a little, essentially make a little spout on one side. Obviously, you could do this with something else. You could use a funnel or whatever and pour it in. I find this to work as easy as anything. So we take a piece of paper, I'm going to put it on my scale. We're going to zero it back out because that paper added 2 grams. And now we are just going to add a little over 4 grams of our tungsten powder. Now, as you remember, it comes with a little spoon. And in this case, this little spoon, basically, when you fill it up, gives you exactly 2 grams, i.e. 1 swing weight point. So if we take 2 spoonfuls of our tungsten powder, well, my scale's not cooperating. Let's try that again. We take the scale, let's zero it out. The paper weighs 2 grams. And as you can see, 6 grams, hopefully you can see. Sorry, my scale gets a little wonky when I'm adding such small amounts of weight a little at a time. But paper weighed 2 grams. You can see here 6 grams now, so we are at 4 grams of tungsten powder. Okay? Now again, remember, because of how these golf clubs are, we'd probably want to add just a little bit extra to get us to that swing weight of, in this case, D7. Okay, and now at this point, we're just going to take the powder and use our little spout that we formed. And we're just going to pour the powder right down into the shaft. Just like that. Now at this point, we can actually swing weight the golf club carefully and see what the swing weight is at with that extra powder. Now remember, that powder is right now just sort of floating around in here. So if you tip this golf club upside down, the powder's all going to move to the grip end. Your swing weight's going to be completely incorrect. So we do this very gently to try and keep the powder down there in the head, and just lay it on the scale. And see what we get. Again, we were at D5, and we are now at D7. Okay, the powder's in here. We know the swing weight is right, but now we need to make sure that the powder doesn't go anywhere. And that is where our little corks are going to come into play. It's also where we are now going to need our ram rod, because all we are going to be doing at this point is essentially corking this bottle. We're going to put one of these corks down into the shaft to hold the tungsten powder in place. First thing I do is I go ahead, after I've got my tungsten powder in the club, and put the ramrod down, all the way down into the shaft, as far down as it wants to go. Then I just mark it with just a little piece of masking tape. Now, why am I doing this? Well, this is essentially just to make sure that when I start to put the cork in, because what we're going to be doing here is kind of, as the name suggests with the ramrod, we're going to be ramming it into the bottom of this club. I want to make sure that I'm ramming that cork as far down as it needs to go in order to make sure that my tungsten powder is fully compressed down in there and isn't floating around in some cavity down there in the bottom of the shaft. So right now I know this is how far this ramrod goes in without the cork. So I know once I put the cork in and I start ramming it down, I should hopefully see something where I have maybe about a little less than a half an inch where the tape is now spaced from the back, from the butt end of the shaft, because that cork is taking up a little bit of that space. But that will tell me that I've got that cork fully set down in there as far as it needs to go. At this point, we're just going to whip up a little bit of epoxy. Again, you are not going to need very much here because the cork is really going to sort of hold itself in place more or less. The epoxy is just sort of a extra assurance. So we're just going to mix this up quick. And all we're going to do is just put a little bit of epoxy just around the bottom of that cork, just like that. It doesn't take much at all, just a tiny little bit down there at the bottom. And now we're going to drop it in, get it started. And just go all the way down with the ramrod, and it'll put up some resistance. And you just kind of have to ram it in there until, as you can see, the tape is now, hopefully you can see this, the tape is now basically about 1/3 of an inch above the end of the shaft, which means that cork is right down there at the bottom. Okay, now we would just let this sit and dry. Obviously in this case, because we're using the quick set epoxy, we only have to wait 5 or 10 minutes and the club is going to be completely dry. We can grip it and it'll be ready to go. Okay, all done. As you can see, very quick, very simple. And if you don't want to use lead tape, and if the club's already put together so you don't want to take it apart to put in a tip weight, tungsten powder is a great option. Now again, that being said, if you're dealing with graphite shafts, and especially if you're dealing with graphite iron shafts where that hole, in many cases, that vent hole is very small, you want to be aware of that, because if you start adding significant amounts of tungsten powder, it's going to start to stack up and build up going up the shaft pretty quick, which is not ideal. With a steel shaft, you don't have to worry about it. There's a lot of room in here to fill with that tungsten powder, so even if you add a lot, it's only going to move up a certain amount. With a graphite shaft, it can move up a lot further. That can be an issue. So I would probably sort of tap out at around 4 to 6 grams of weight into a graphite iron shaft. Any more than that, I think you got to go with a different method, because it's going to start to move up in the shaft. And as we already talked about, the more it moves up the shaft, the more weight you have to add to try and get the swing weight right. So all of a sudden, you're going to be adding a significant amount of total weight just to try and hit a swing weight. So be aware of that. But with a steel shaft, especially with a set of irons, all you need is to get the grips off, get the tape off, and you can do this very simply. Let it dry, put the grips back on, and you're all set, and the club looks basically just like it did from the factory. So there you go. If you enjoyed this video, please go down below, like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you'll be alerted when I post new videos. You can find me on Instagram at Mobile Club Maker, and I will see you on the next video. Bye.